I often see other engineers, other people in UX and QA, they run into some issue on their project. They want to stop the management. They want to put the project on hold. And they're making that whole argument based on themselves only and whatever reputation they have and whatever trust they've built up. And, we as one person can only hold so much, authority and trust that the other person's going to have in us. If we've got a group of people who can all go to the manager and say, hey, this is a problem. Hey, this is a problem. Here's the impact. Here's the impact. And they're hearing that, that recurring message. You need to find basically people who are sympathetic to your cause. Ever feel like management ignores really good advice that you give them on your software project? You see problems coming. You've tried so hard to warn them, but they just don't seem to care. This is because facts aren't enough to move managers. Today, I want to teach you some techniques I learned in 15 years of software consulting that'll help you really get through to your boss or other management when it feels like you've taught them the right things, you've told them exactly how it's going to benefit them, and it still feels like you can't get anywhere. As I talk to you about these strategies today, keep in mind, I'm trying to help you work in oftentimes a broken system where this is people we're dealing with here and nobody's perfect. But let's just get right into it. The first one is you got to frame your feedback or your suggestion in terms of an impact that matters to whoever you're talking to. When I started out early in my career, I would be on a project, and let's say I saw some issue with the database not being backed up. And I would just want to tell management, hey, we've got this problem. The databases aren't being backed up. I mean, this is a super simple example, but I just tell them the information about what the problem was. And I think as engineers, a lot of times, if you're an engineer or you're in, UX or QA or DevOps or any of these kinds of roles, just communicating the problem is so hard in and of itself. We feel like we've finished the job of, influencing the manager or motivating them to support us by the time we've explained the problem. But the problem with going about it this way is we haven't really connected the dots for the manager or whoever we're talking to between what the problem is and the impact it's going to have that the manager even cares about. So for example, if your databases, aren't being backed up or there's some issue with, let's say, disaster recovery that should be in place so that if something wrong happens, the company doesn't get into trouble. If you knew your manager, let's say, is really feeling a lot of pressure to make sure they get some release out, or they have a specific big customer, this is common in startups and in smaller companies where you'll have some really big, client or customer that the company doesn't want to lose the gig or doesn't want to lose that customer. There's a lot of money coming in. If you frame the thing you're concerned about, like, hey, the databases aren't being backed up. If those databases go down, the system's not going to be available, and the big customer, whatever their name is, isn't going to get access to the system. Suddenly, the manager, you've tuned into what they really care about and an impact that matters to them. I don't want to say they don't care, but they're not necessarily going to be concerned about the details of that some aspect of the software isn't being built the way that you think it should be, unless they understand that it's actually a problem for them. And so often you have to future pace them to see what that negative result really looks like. I'll tell you a true story of how this actually took place for me. I was working as a consultant for a client. I'd done about 2 years of work for them before on 3 or 4 different projects. This is when I was working for myself, but I was, basically contracting with this company as a consultant, giving them advice on a whole variety of things. and they wanted to select a new CRM or customer relationship management product to use at the company. And their existing CRM product, the company that they bought it from, started to really be kind of price gouging them. They were asking a lot more money than they used to be. And so this client I was working with was really pissed off and frustrated because they were like, we've been using the CRM software. It's always been fine. Now all of a sudden it's super expensive. What are we going to do? So they started to look at a new CRM system, and they started to evaluate it, and they're talking to the vendor and they're looking at pricing, and somebody who really trusted me in the company, and that point is going to come up in a moment here when it comes to influencing people, reached out to me and said, "Hey, Jamie, I'm worried about this CRM project. I don't think it's the right decision, but I see all these people at the company getting ready to support it. Would you come in and look at sort of this CRM product they're looking at selecting, see if there's any concerns that you have and help me communicate that?" And I said, sure. And we signed a new statement of work and agreed on a bill rate. And it was another small project I did for them. And so as I was in there looking at the CRM software, on the surface, the cost of it seemed like it was going to save the company money. But when I looked into it in more detail, I realized that it was sort of like a separate front end and back end CRM system. I don't want to overwhelm you with the complexity too much here. But the important thing is the front end had to make API calls directly to this back end. So it had to request data and push data back and forth over an API or programming interface over the web. And this company was charging per API call, which is often what API companies or, cloud vendors will do, right? They'll have usage-based pricing. So once we looked at the usage patterns, how this client was going to use the software, and how much it was going to cost, it ended up being way more expensive than just even sticking with their current CRM vendor. And so the reason I tell you the story is, again, I didn't just come to the client and just say, hey, this, system uses usage-based pricing, and it's a problem because it's going to cost a lot more money. I actually had to do the work to do basically some math and then show the client, here's how much I'm estimating it's going to cost you, let's say per month. And here's how I came up with the estimate. And suddenly it was put in terms of a business impact where the management took notice. They stepped back from maybe looking at that CRM as, their first option, and they started to kind of broaden their view to look at some better alternatives. The second strategy you can use to influence management is you can really build a group of peers and allies that'll support you in convincing, upper management or your boss or whoever that they should do whatever it is that you're suggesting. If you watched the last episode I just put out, I'll put a link in the description if you want to check it out if you haven't seen it yet. I told the story of one of the worst software projects I've ever been on in my career. And there were all kinds of things that went wrong on that project. Some of them were probably my fault for not pushing harder to have certain things change. Other things were clearly out of my control and other people's fault. But, a kind of theme that was running under that whole story is that I didn't really have support at my consulting company when things went wrong, where enough people would back me when I raised my concerns. And big part of the reason for that is I spent too much of my time as a consultant at client sites or with customers, writing code for them, advising them on Agile, whatever the project was. And I hadn't really spent as much time with the upper management and even middle management at my consulting company, getting to know them, building really strong relationships with them too. So when the time came, when suddenly, stuff hit the fan, so to speak, I didn't really have the relationships and the allies that I needed to really, put this project on hold. Again, you're going to have to go back and watch that episode if you want the details about what happened. But, I often see other engineers, other people in UX and QA, they run into some issue on their project. They want to stop the management. They want to put the project on hold. And they're making that whole argument based on themselves only and whatever reputation they have and whatever trust they've built up. And, we as one person can only hold so much, authority and trust that the other person's going to have in us. If we've got a group of people who can all go to the manager and say, hey, this is a problem. Hey, this is a problem. Here's the impact. Here's the impact. And they're hearing that, that recurring message. You need to find basically people who are sympathetic to your cause. So if you're on a project, you need to stop something, you need to change something before just going to your boss or your manager and presenting the issue and even doing what I said before, telling them the impact it's going to have on their business or the things they care about. See if you can really build relationships with other people, get to know them personally, have an authentic relationship. I've talked about this in the episode I did on persuasion. This was about a year ago. And, if you can get them to agree to talk to the manager as well, maybe right after you or maybe a little bit before, the more different people are basically saying the same message, the better chance you have that they're going to make the change. They're going to take it seriously because now it's not just your word. It's a whole group of people. The third thing you can do to really build influence with management is you got to choose your battles very wisely and carefully. I've talked about this issue in several other episodes. And as I coach people professionally in their tech careers, I realize people don't think about this enough. Every battle, every problem you run into, every issue is not equal and is not worth your time fighting to try to win or get support. In that same story in the last episode, I talked about where the project went south. I had a manager above me that the company put above me who was brand new to managing Agile projects. And I had already managed projects using Agile for 12 years at this point. And I felt really like I knew that something might go bad because of that. I didn't really like the thought of somebody brand new to Agile suddenly managing my project when I felt like I already had a really good handle on Agile. But again, going back to the prior point of building alliances with people, I didn't have the support at the company to really push back against them putting this manager above me. And I kind of knew that from the beginning of the project. So I chose not to fight against that. I chose not to try to get that manager to be removed. Now, they eventually did get fired. Not necessarily because they were a bad manager or because they weren't good at Agile. Again, go watch that video if you want to know what happened. But, ultimately, if I would have fought really hard to get this person pulled off my project, I think I probably would have been just looked at like a jerk. It would have been more reason for people to distrust me or micromanage me or be concerned about me. And ultimately, it probably just would have put me in a worse spot than just going, you know what, that battle, not worth fighting. The fourth thing you can do to really build influence with your management, get them to make a change that you want, even if they aren't changing themselves, even if they don't necessarily want to listen to the facts alone, is to really introduce a change or a suggestion that you want to make as small and as incrementally as possible. I see a lot of really amazing, let's say, software architects or, high level consultants that will come into a team at a company that they don't know. And they'll see all these red flags and problems, there's a problem with how they're doing their feature branches, or there's a problem with how they're deploying to their testing environment, or there's a problem with, inconsistency in coding patterns. It could really be anything. And they just kind of capture all that information and they shove it all out there, at once. And that becomes so overwhelming. But on top of that, it's really asking management to support you on a whole bunch of things that, they might support you, let's say, with one of the issues, but not with three of the others. And if you kind of bring them all to them at once, you're actually reducing your chance that you're going to get support for, whatever it is you want to change. So, going back to, I did an episode earlier on the channel about why managers often don't trust programmers. And one of these reasons being, I think developers, sometimes we have a tendency to bring too many problems to management at once. And then they see us sort of as a problem or Debbie Downer. This is somewhat related to that, this suggestion, but this is more thinking about how, you're going to lose the chance to get support for an idea if you bundle it in with a bunch of others. You may know this, but the US government, for example, when they're going to pass a bill in Congress or something like that, those bills usually are packed with not just the main title of the bill or the main thing that's sort of like the public thinks it's about. There's all these other little details in there and all these other things that they're trying to sort of cram in approval for within the same bill. And what that ultimately ends up doing is it slows down the passing of the legislation. It creates all these conflicts of interest where, the two parties, at least in the United States, they don't agree. And so it makes the government really inefficient. You can avoid that same problem when you're trying to influence management by saying, okay, I see all these problems. Which one of these is the most likely that it would take the least trust for management to support me on it? How do I introduce that to just them and kind of bite my lip, be patient, and wait until they've made that change? They've seen it was successful. They've seen the benefits of it, and then pitch the next one. Here's the thing. I really want to encourage you to not beat yourself up about stuff you can't change. When we're on these projects, there's all kinds of people in positions of power. There's a lot of history to it. There's a lot of quirks. Every single software project I've ever been on in my career, there's at least one manager who's difficult and somewhat narcissistic. There's usually some sort of key technical person who's very brash and hard to deal with and kind of egotistical. There may be a QA person who's really just nitpicking everything. You can run into a lot of these kind of tropes of different personalities on software projects, and you're going to just drive yourself nuts if you try to change it all or you worry about all of it. So, if you're really frustrated on your software project and you really want to influence management or other people, I just want to encourage you, let go of the stuff that you can't change. It's not going to help your sleep, your career, your sense of peace. It's also not going to help you build a really strong relationship and trust with people if you worry too much about everything that you see as a problem and you don't actually make progress on the things that are within your influence and are within your control. Trust is built over time. You may have heard this saying, trust is deposited in drops and withdrawn in buckets. I love this saying. The idea being, to build trust with another person so they'll support you takes a lot of little drops, little actions day after day after day that they see that they can trust you. But all it takes is one, really bad decision or one kind of pushy thing with a person, and they'll withdraw all that trust. So, I want to encourage you out there, try to be patient, try to be strategic, look at your job as you're somewhat of a political strategist, almost like, you need to look at all the people that are involved, what they're motivated by, and try to figure out, how do I navigate this without, just completely pissing off a bunch of people. And some of this just takes time. So, if you're worried about losing your job out there, if you're worried about moving ahead, if you're trying to influence people, if you've been really frustrated in the past, you're worried it's going to happen again, maybe be a little bit more patient with yourself this time. So are you frustrated by management not supporting you right now? Do you have something actually going on where you can't seem to get through to management? Have you tried these strategies I've shared? Which one are you stuck on? And do you have some success stories of times you've done this that have really helped? Until next time, thanks.